that introduction. So what we're going to do this afternoon a little bit, we had to kind of improvise on the fly a little bit. What we decided to do is I kind of have these two bookends on the panel here. We have Gary. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the folks to introduce themselves, a short note, what they do, and then maybe talk about 5 minutes about their piece. The reason we have the Tickums up here is, for those of you who heard General Vai's speech this morning, he probably said the word threat like I think maybe 10 or 15 times in the speech. And one of the issues in the cyber world is really how do we get our arms around the threat, and how do you really keep up with the changing pace of the threat. So the original title really talked about convergence in a combined arms acquisition. Our panel is probably going to talk about what work you have to do prior to the traditional things that you think about in acquisition. So I'm going to ask the Tickums to really focus on, hey, what's the threat, how the threat translates into a requirement, and how the requirement translates into a capability. So the industry folks are kind of aware of what are the capabilities and the requirements and threats that we're dealing with. And then that leads generally to the acquisition piece. And some of us up here have a little bit of an acquisition background. We can kind of answer some of those questions. But, Doug was supposed to do this panel, and he kind of handed it off at me at the last minute. So I owe Doug, or he owes me after this panel or whatever. But so that's kind of what we're going to work toward. But I really thought what was important about General Vai's speech is he really, really hammered home the threat and how do you keep up with the threat in a really fast-paced, changing environment. I thought it was really important. The other piece is really, when we say convergence, and oftentimes people use convergence in a number of different ways. In the CIO G6 last year, I talked about how we use network convergence and how we're really converging networks behind the firewall, or how we converge networks between the high side and the low side and the SIPR side. I think the themes from the bookend side of the house will talk about convergence in terms of communities, and we have fairly well-established communities, and we have a growing community. But the idea is to look at the relationships between the Cyber 17 community, the Signal community, the Intel community, and how those relationships are going to form and build. And so that's a different type of convergence, and so you'll probably hear a little bit of that today also. So I'm not going to introduce everybody, but I understand that you could have typed on the website and been able to look up on the website and look up everybody's bio. And so in the name of saving time, and then also I really want to see us get into a dialogue or a conversation. So the point is to hopefully go through the guys quickly. They throw some issues out on the table, and hopefully we'll get some good questions coming from the audience. I have a little bit of a little softball list if we need to get the juices going. So we'll go ahead and start, and we'll just go right down the row. So Gary, you want to go ahead and start?
So I'm Gary Blom. I'm the acting director of the Intelligence Information Warfare Directorate at CERDAC. Very new to me being in the intelligence community. I've spent most of my time in this community, starting with SATCOM, networking, working for Gary in the CIRG6 as my last assignment. One thing you notice, he put, again, he talked about the bookends with me and John Willison at the other end, and you say, well, there's a huge gap between John and Gary. I'll tell you, with the way technology's moving, there is no such gap. The things we're doing really work across all of the CERDAC, not just our two directorates. And I do have a build chart that I'm going to get to in a second, but I wanted to talk for a moment about a two-day session we had last week, and this does tie into a little acquisition. So the Intelligence Center of Excellence has a 30-year MI plan, MI strategy. They're not writing a strategy and handing it over the fence to us and the PEO. We're helping them work through that, understanding the technologies and where the technologies are going and what's capable and possible, and the threat. So we had a two-day session where we talked about the mid and far range plans for science and technology and how it fit that ICO strategy. and how it fit, and how do we influence and shape the acquisition pieces. And there's a couple things that really kind of continually pop out. You know, some is about architecture, and how do we get to some places in architecture where we can truly now converge. And converge is a dangerous word because we use converge so often. You know, I'll say converge, someone will say, oh, that's transport convergence. Someone else will say, oh, that's this convergence, that's convergence. So I use the word too, or integrated cyber EW SIGINT. So we talk a lot about architectures and how do we provide the agility, because the threat is evolving very quickly and we need to be not reactive, but try to get ahead of that threat. Multi what? Multi-int, multi-capability, multi-function. Everything we're talking about is using things in non-traditional ways. And so we had an OV1 that we showed. I got it from TradeOff. I actually changed an OV1 and they didn't get mad at me because they had all these MI collectors out there. And I said, well, geez, what about all those radios that are on the battlefield? You know, let's start making that part of the conversation. So I think one of my messages to you in industry is when you start talking to us, think a little bit more broad than these stovepipes that we still even are working to get out of today. So right now I had that with General Volmek, I had that with General Barrier, T2, and INSCOM. We need to expand that and have that with Gary Martin, John Willison, General Fogarty. We need to have that broader conversation and really work some of these architecture and multis together. If I can go to my build chart. If you can do the next click. When we start talking basic technologies, you can talk to the engineers in not just the CERDAC, but across the base, across the enterprise, the services industry, and you talk about basic technology. We can apply it in so many different worlds, and we all talk the same language at that area. Next build. But then we let our programs and our structures break those technologies out and start stovepiping these things. And that creates challenges with the requirements process and how flexible we are, but it's also the technologies as we start breaking up into different architectures, different standards, different interfaces. If we could do the next build. And then we have different groups and different users, and how do we work through the ConOps of all these things? And we have diverging mission needs. In many cases, the same capabilities, the same technologies inside those multi-boxes can be used for multiple capabilities. Next chart. And then we create all kinds of policies and classification boundaries. I can't emphasize, being very new to ITW, classification boundaries is a big challenge for me. I'm still learning that a little bit, coming out of more of the networking world, about how I want to tell that person, but I don't know if I can, and how do we break some of those classification guides down? And it goes to some of the cyber blitz things that I think Don will talk about. How do we break those policies down and have more sharing and collaboration, because the opportunities are enormous. If we can build the next chart. One size, so how do we do this? Software development frameworks, techniques, and effects development. How do we build those capabilities? How do we develop a standard SDK? How do we address all those near peer and emerging technologies? Next chart. It is not about building one size fits all. One thing I found is over my career is sometimes we take that pendulum too far when we start trying to look at fixing a problem. And we'll talk about, oh, we want to make something multi-everything. But then we end up giving up, it's going to be a hybrid. We need to not always over-standardize or over-multi things, because there will be cases where we need a sensor to do a mission or two and not try to cover every mission with that one sensor. But we need to look at that, and we need to work with our trade-off partners very closely to understand what's the art of the possible and what are the trades we do when we make those decisions. Next slide. How will this all work together? It's not just technology. It's about how do we apply those technologies? How do we figure out how we're going to share, control, and access? Sometimes it's not about all about control. Sometimes it's really about just getting accessibility to those things. How do we plan this mission? This ties also, I don't talk about mission command here, but this ties into mission command. And as we look forward, how do we take these assets and decide how we're going to employ them to meet the commander's intent? and shared situational understanding, whether it be cyber situational understanding across the board, understanding that and looking at this through analytics, data models. How do we create, we have a lot of data out there today. In fact, I sometimes think, when we add more data to our mission set, are we adding clarity or confusion? And so how do we come up with the analytics? How do we come up with the abilities to understand that and simplify, try to simplify all this information for the commander and for the user? And next slide. Because it's really, in the end, about any mission from any node and any threat. And so we really need to look at this holistically. We had over 2 days, like I said, at this Force Integration Working Group, we had a lot of heated discussions about what made sense and what didn't make sense, as far as we started looking over the intelligence enterprise of how we combine things, what are some of the architectural decisions we make, how do we go to implementation. I think we do a great job coming up with architectures. We do a less great job in figuring out how do we want to implement that over a huge, huge domain. And so those are some of the challenges we're working on. I changed the word from converge, cyber, EW, and SIGINT to integrated, because I didn't want to talk about transport conversion. But this is really, I think, an opportunity for us to look at how do we provide these capabilities across the battle space. There's a lot of opportunities. We have a lot of vehicles, we have a lot of antennas, a lot of radios, and a lot of processing power, and how do we use that across the space?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Colonel Sean Branch, and I'm the TRADOC Capability Manager for Tactical Radios. And so I'm pausing here, and I'm trying to look at folks' faces and see what kind of reaction I get when I say tactical radios, that I'm the TRADOC Capability Manager for Tactical Radios. Okay, and so the reaction that I'm used to getting, which was the first time I found out I was going to be the capability manager for tactical radios, was at last year's TechNet. And so some of you were here then. And as we walked around on the floor, I got a lot of questions about tactical radios, and I had no clue. And I also got this scringe on folks' faces when I said tactical radios. And I just could not figure out why. Why is it such a bad term, tactical radios? Other than the fact that, after a year of being in this position, I don't have the hair that I had a year ago, and I'm probably about 2 inches shorter. Other than that, I mean, what's the problem? I really don't see it. So if someone can help me understand that, I'd appreciate it. So I'm responsible for all the tactical radio requirements that are really focused at the battalion level and below, down to the companies and down to the dismounts, really where folks are really at the tactical edge. That's where my responsibilities and most of my focus is. And that includes the radio platforms, it includes all the waveforms and all the other associated devices that come with radios. Another big one that I'm responsible for is the assured positioning, navigation, and timing requirement that we're working on developing right now. And so I won't talk to you today about all the capabilities and requirements that I'm responsible for, but I will talk a little bit about the ones that I see as potentially helping us integrate cyber into the combined arms fight. And so one of the first requirements that's developing and that we're continuing to work is the mid-tier requirement. The requirement to have a radio to bridge the upper and the lower portions of the tactical network. And so right now, the only capability that we have out there to bridge that gap, that digital gap, is the maneuver radio. And so we're looking for a solution to do that in a satellite denied or degraded environment. And right now, like I said, the only capability we have is the maneuver. It has its challenges. It's an NDI solution. So we're looking for industry to help us, industry and research to help us come up with a solution to bridge that digital gap. Additionally, I talked about the digital gap. As a part of that closing gap, we're also looking to bring in aviation. to bring the aviation into that mid-tier portion of the network digitally, not just using SINGARs and voice, but as we get more comfortable with moving data around the battlefield, we need to bring in the aviation community. So we're looking for a capability. Right now, we're looking at the small airborne networking radio to provide that to the aviation platforms, to allow the aviators to talk to the ground operations, the ground operators to conduct air-ground operations. And so not only we're just looking for a data radio to bridge that gap, we're looking for a radio that's survivable in a cyber and an EW contested environment. And so one of the things that we've done as a first step to put that into requirements documents, we've done that with the SANER radio requirement. We've also done that with the handheld radio requirement. And so a lot of the requirements that we've previously written didn't address radios and systems that are survivable in a cyber and EW contested environment. So you're going to see those requirements out there, and we're looking for industry and research to help us get to those solutions where we're not continuing to put out radios, using the same thought process, looking at things from a threat from years ago. Here we have an opportunity. We can see what's coming around the corner. If you look at a lot of the things that General Fogarty has talked about, what General Hodges opened up with in the beginning, he talked about the threat. It's right in front of us. We see it. We're able to see around the corner. So what are we going to do about it? So we're looking for research and industry to help us with that. And then earlier I talked about assured position, navigation, and timing. Another very important capability to our forces. I think most folks know that for the last 15 or 20 years, we've relied heavily on GPS. GPS access to positioning, navigation, and timing has really been a force multiplier for our warfighters. And I think we tend to continue to use that. So we have to be proactive in coming up with solutions to ensure we have access to it. And so as a part of that requirement, some of the key aspects that I'm looking for in a solution is that ensured access to PNT. I'm looking for protection of our PNT systems, and we're also looking so that we can trust the PNT information that we're receiving. This is a particular capability that's not just applicable to radios, it's across the Army's entire portfolio of capabilities. Just about every system we use requires positioning, navigation, and timing information. And again, that will help us as we fight in a satellite denied or contested environment. So those are just some of the key requirements that are out there and that we're continuing to work on. But again, those are the ones that I see as contributing to cyber in the combined arms fight. And so I'll pause here and I welcome your questions, either here or even after this event ends. I welcome your questions on any of those requirements that I just talked about.
I'm Mark Dotson. I'm the TICM for electronic warfare, or TICM EW. Just like in the field where cyber and radio, network, folks all work together, we here at Fort Gordon, all the TICMs, we work together. We're in the same building, so we get that synergy. I work closely with with the folks you see here today, and we work in the proponency for electronic warfare. This is where the proponent resides for electronic warfare in the Army. The specific team I work with covers the requirements for electronic warfare and those activities in the electromagnetic spectrum. All the synchronization for those efforts takes place across .mil/P. Some of the key areas that we're working on are electromagnetic C2 tools, attack tools for commanders from the tactical to the operational level, and better protection for our soldiers. So the key one among these is going to be the EWPMT, or the Electronic Warfare Planning and Management Tool. And what this tool is going to allow us to do is it's going to help us to operate better in a increasingly congested and contested spectrum. That's the initial part. So in the short term, it's going to, when we release it in about 2 to 3 months from now, the first step of it. It'll allow the EWOs and spectrum managers to take a look at how they can plan better in the electromagnetic spectrum. As the tool evolves, it's going to interact with the other networked systems inside the operations centers, such as AFATADs or DSIGs, and it's going to be available to staffs so that they can have a holistic view, and they can create a user-defined operational picture that includes those aspects of all the C2 tools that are there that best suits their particular field and what they need to analyze in order to better inform the commander. Importantly, on the third capability drop, it becomes the basis for a foundation of cyber situational understanding for the commander. Finally, as it goes through its increments, it will have real-time capability to show what's happening in the electromagnetic spectrum on the battlefield from both an enemy and a friendly perspective. As you saw on day one, another thing that we're working currently is a needs statement from the user or commander. And what's important to note about that is, yes, he did identify some of the gaps, but the solutions to those requirements aren't being worked in a vacuum. The solutions to those requirements and any other requirements that are going to come up that involve the electromagnetic spectrum have to be consistent and interoperable with the tools that we're developing now. So it's not a bridging strategy that stops. It's one that continues through the foreseeable future. That's a basic overview of what EWPMT or TICM EW is working currently, and I look forward to y'all's questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Troy Douglas. I'm the TICM for Networks and Services. I pick up where Sean at the battalion level and carry the network to the various strategic teleports and gateways across our portfolio. But what I really want to talk to you today is in fact some convergent efforts that we are undergoing. The first is that transport convergence that was brought up earlier. So over the past years, even dating back as far as MSC, the Signal Corps weren't able to provide that bandwidth requirements and meet the needs of all of our customers. So unfortunately, they went out and kind of either outsourced or procured their own capabilities. So the first time now, we have the capabilities to provide that capability. So over the course of the next few years, we're going to start providing that doing that convergence back into the signal community to provide that commander that decentralized, that centralized protected network, as well as providing the commander so they can gain the efficiencies or situational understanding of their own networks. Because right now, with the various dispersed networks, it's hard for them to see what is out there. Also, again, with that convergence, we look at what kind of efficiency we can gain from the bandwidth utilization, but not only that, but how we reduce our electromagnetic footprint. So we kind of break that into 3 phases over time. The first phase is convergence of the intel requirement, division and below, as we work to absorb the Trojan Spirit requirements, and the Signal Corps becomes responsible, or the G6 then becomes responsible at division and below for that capabilities. The second phase being the medical, the PAO, and the other various VSAT terminals that through ONS and again outsourcing of their networks where folks have rented capabilities, is to bring those down, and that's primarily harnessing our expeditionary signal battalion's capability, as well as fielding some better VSAT capability. And then the last phase of that is for the CSS community, and bringing those guys down to a centrally protected gateway into the backside of the Army network. And that's just the transport convergence side. And Sean briefly talked about it, but our other efforts are at the NetOps convergence. Unfortunately, over time, because we've given that requirements under each program of record, we've decentralized NetOps. So what we have to do now is look at how do we converge this. So if you look at Sean's requirements down at the lower TI, he has one set of NetOps tools. We have increment 1 and increment 2 disparities between those. And even in our strategic ranks, we have another 250 some odd tool sets. So over the next years, we've got to converge those again, as well as integrate both to my left and right from the cyber and the AEW into that tool set too. If you've ever seen or if walked into a CP, it's kind of disheartening to see the G6 or the S6 shops when they've got about 40 computers or so around their environment, around their sale, and of course they only have about a third of that manpower to operate those things. So that too, those conversion of tools into virtual or thin client capability. But I'll pause and hand it over to Colonel Presby.
Thank you, Troy. Good afternoon. I am Tim Presby, the TradeOut Capability Manager for Cyber. And like my peers here, they covered a lot of the convergence that we are working on collectively at the Center of Excellence. But I'd like to take a step back and look at why we need to converge. So earlier this week when we addressed or talked briefly about the Army Warfighting Challenge number 7, we looked at those threat capabilities. And we need to be aware that we are very likely going to fight an adversary that is converging using SEMA integration with ISR and FIRES across full spectrum conflict. So unless we actually work together and converge our capabilities, we will be left short. So I just wanted to use that threat picture to kind of lay the groundwork on why this is important. So as the capability manager or TICM for cyber, my portfolio covers those efforts to really help our cyber forces. So as Troy talks about the DODIN and the convergence piece from a transport perspective, I'm focused on some of those advanced cyber or advanced persistent threats to address a lot of the DCO or defensive cyberspace operations that we're working. Additionally, as we look forward, as part of that framework, there are many areas in which we touch across the other TICMs. So as I look at the data mining and cyber analytics efforts that we're doing, that can touch many of the efforts that Mark Dotson is working in TICM EW. He briefly addressed the electronic warfare planning and management tool. We envision analytics engine not only supporting the cyber protect teams as we go forward and develop a DCO maneuver baseline to provide both the infrastructure as well as the tools for our cyber protect teams and cyber mission forces to conduct their missions against advanced persistent threats. Additionally, when we talk cyber analytics, data mining, we're also looking at using that for cyberspace situational understanding. So as Colonel Dotson addressed the EWPMT and that transition to that more holistic cyber SU, it's important to use data mining, cyber analytics to address those concerns. So when we talk cyber SU, I really want to take it a step beyond what we're addressing with EWPMT. Yes, we're looking at the friendly and red networks, but we're really looking at it holistically from that converged aspect. We're looking across all the warfighting functions, all right? We're trying to integrate not only the electromagnetic spectrum, but from a NetOps perspective, the NetOps tools and sensors that are out there. Additionally, we want to look at the red picture as well. And that's where it's important that Unfortunately, we don't have a representative from the Intel Center of Excellence, but we are partnering with Fort Huachuca to address some of those concerns as well, because we must work holistically to address that. One other area that I'd like to mention, in addition to the DCO, we work offensive cyberspace operations. I really won't go into that in too much detail, but I want to talk another area that we recently are looking at it from a requirements perspective, and that's the persistent training environment for cyberspace. So as we look at the need to train our cyber forces collectively, the way we are conducting that training now is woefully inadequate. It requires too much time, too much prep to deliver that training. So working with the Joint Staff and Cybercom, who have recently developed an initial capability development document for the persistent training environment, we as the Army have taken the lead in the requirements area to continue that work. So as we look at the persistent training environment and what that means, it's really that environment, the connectivity, the facilities, and that event management that allows us to deliver 24/7 persistent training from the individual to the collective level, as well as allow us to do some of those testing and capability development within a controlled environment. Lastly, and to touch on what Troy mentioned briefly, the need to converge with regard to some of our DCO toolkits. So as we look at the number of toolkits the S6 has in their rucksack down at the lower levels, we're looking closely at the DCO tools that we're delivering to ensure that we are not duplicative and that we can consolidate where possible from not only a standpoint of making it less complex for that S6 or operator at that lower level, but also from a resource-constrained environment. We have far too many gaps and requirements to address in with the current resources we have. So we have to make those hard decisions, look at the risks, and adjust to deliver a capability that really covers the entire spectrum. So I'll pause there. I kind of jumped around. Many of my peers here have touched upon. We have a great working relationship, and we look forward to your questions. John?
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is John Willison. I'm the director for the CERDEC Space and Terrestrial Communications Directorate within CERDEC. So basically, that's the Army's R&D organization for everything on the network, to include cyber defense. As both Gary's mentioned, a number of us have experience in multiple communities. I've been in POC3T a number of times, in CCOM, and back into the R&D organization. So first of all, I want to say thank you and good job to AFCEA for another great conference. This really has shaped up to be a great conference, and I know a number of our people in our community had tried to get here, and the airlines had different ideas, and it took us a little while to get here, and some of us, and hopefully that's not true getting home. But again, great conference, and General Fogarty and Bob, I applaud you for your presence here. I think it really means a lot to have your consistent presence and to emphasize the discussion. So this is the second year in a row where I'm the last speaker in the last session on the last day. I'm really not sure what the message is there. I think if the invite comes next year that I'm speaking on Saturday, I'll know something really bad happened. But so what new do I have to say after 3 days of great leaders speaking? Honestly, probably not much, if anything. But it does give me an opportunity to kind of to recap, I think, and summarize some of what we've heard, some of what I think is important, and go from there. And Colonel Branch, by the way, this is not a sign of stress. It's a sign of maturity. It's all good. All right, so I'm going to talk quickly about 3 things. One is innovation, since that's our job, S&T community, engineering community. Talk quickly about kind of how we're looking at innovation. I want to broaden that discussion and talk about what's it mean for the Army to try to be innovative within the cyberspace. And then the third thing, touch on people. So first of all, innovation. And again, that's our mission within the S&T community, and so how do we look at that? On the network side, we look at our S&T portfolio in really 3 parts. First part is how do we enable the Army to get more expeditionary? It's appropriate that I'm the only one with a wireless mic, since a lot of what we're trying to do is wireless command post, wireless soldiers, and get the Army more expeditionary. The other two parts of our portfolio was discussed about are really threat-based. And so we've got another part of our portfolio, uninterrupted operations, which really looks at addressing the RF threat. And then the final part of that is our cyber portfolio, which really looks at the cyber threat. And we're doing a lot to really root our investments back in a threat, and work that way. Some of the challenges we see, we've in POC3T's terms, they will tell you we've spent 10 years building capacity on the network and are now starting to swing the emphasis back into how do we protect that, and what's the protection for that capacity. So a lot of our challenges are, how do you balance between capacity and what people want? You know, streaming video down to the dismounted soldier, got it, great. How do you protect that? And so it's a balancing, it's a trade space, as well as the complexity in addressing that as well. One of our priorities within the S&T world is also to take a swing back from developing capabilities to meet near-term needs to really what I think is probably as valuable, if not more valuable, a role for the Army's S&T organization, and that is to inform investment decisions. And to show what's possible, to show what could be done in what time frame, so either we're informing TRADOC communities of what's possible and what requirements make sense, we're informing PEOs in the ASOL community on investment decisions from there. And so you'll continue to hear an emphasis from us within the R&D world on doing S&T to inform decisions. And we've had a number of initiatives, whether that's the exercise we had up in April, working to try to take the Cyber Center of Excellence, Jennifer Fogarty's vision of a converged CP, and see where we're at, working with 25th ID, working with TRADOC, working with our PEO partners to take a look, get a snapshot of where we're at, and inform investment decisions from there, as well as partnering with the Battle Lab down here on CyberQuest. And so you'll continue to hear that from us. It's a little different way that some people look at S&T, where it's not just what's the next technology, but it's really looking from an experimentation and attainment. So that's innovation. Let me talk about kind of what's innovation mean from cyber from my perspective. 6 months ago or so, I was part of a discussion with General Perkins, and he made a great comment, and that is his observation that if you're going to differentiate yourself from a known adversary, the way you do that is to have a better capability. If you're going to differentiate yourself from an unknown adversary and an unknown future, the way you differentiate is speed. Its ability to move, its ability to innovate, its ability to do things quick. So picking up on that, from my perspective, what's it mean from a speed perspective, from an innovation within cyber? What are some of our challenges? What are some of we have to figure out? So the tendency when you talk about moving fast is to move alone, right? But that goes against everything we just talked about from a convergence perspective. So one of our big challenges, it's collective speed, it's not individual speed. You know, and so while speed's got to be the goal, it's also got to be the goal to go together from a community perspective. So acquisition community, requirements community, S&T community, whole community moving together. And I'm going to broaden that to include then industry coalition partners. Quite a big challenge. People don't necessarily equate speed to our acquisition process, right? But we got to figure that out. We got to figure out what we got to do different from that perspective. So collective speed, and again, from our perspective, that means collaboration as much as it means competition. Second thing I would say is innovating then within cyberspace means an emphasis on convergence and simplification. I mean, the networks that we've got right now, very complex. We've got a lot of different parts of those networks, and so there's got to be a component that talks about simplification. And this is a vision shared by the PEO, so I'm not promoting heresy from an R&D perspective only. This is a view that kind of is collective to say we got to make it simpler if we're going to move quicker, if we're going to be able to innovate, and if we're going to be able to defend what we have, and convergence as well. From an S&T perspective, one of the emphasis we have then is standards-based, right? Because we want to allow for innovation by industry, by others, but we want it to be within a framework, within a standard, within a construct. Within that as well, we talk about the complexity from my perspective. You heard a reference at some point earlier today about third offset and autonomy. I'd encourage you to take a broad view of autonomy and not just think robots, but think automation. What can we automate on the decision science end? What can we automate on the back end? So while complex things are happening, from a user perspective, they look pretty simple. And so that's a heavy emphasis from us from an S&T. And the last part, again, echoing some of what General Perkins has said, is we got to get used to not kind of falling in line with the way our system works, where our whole system's built to try to take all the risk out of our process, right? And that's kind of where some of the slowness comes in, the deliberateness comes in. We've got to get used to taking maximum prudent risk, right? Now that's a different construct, but again, if you want to move quick, if you want to innovate quick, if you want to differentiate based on speed, we've got to get used to taking maximum prudent risk, understanding what the risks are, and then moving out, and really on the acquisition side and the S&T side, really practicing mission command. So allowing for discipline initiative within a broad intent. Third part I said I was going to talk about is people. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up at least quickly. None of what I talked about is possible if we don't have the right people at all levels. And there's a lot of parallel between the people discussion and the network discussion that we've got from how do we move out quickly? How do we get the right people quickly? How do we retain those folks? How do we grow those folks? How do we evolve? A lot of challenges within there. There's a 1968 computer science law, Conway's law, basically says your resulting product is a direct reflection of your organization structure and the people that you have, right? And so it makes you think that if we want something different, we got to be willing to think about what different people do we need, what different way do we recruit, categorize those people, promote those people, retain those people if we want something different. Because if we think we're going to do something radically different with the same construct, we're going to be disappointed in the end. So within the people space, again, speed, convergence, whether that on the civilian side is a job series for cyber, like we've got now a series on the military side, and having that being broad and allowing for adaptability within that, and we continue to work that. So again, just quickly, innovation, what it means within cyber, and then just highlighting the emphasis on people. And so thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you. Just to kind of some themes I heard in the panel, I thought we had a good spread, but one of the things I'd like to highlight is when I talked about how the TICMs express the threat and the requirement and the capabilities that they're looking for. Probably the biggest theme on the threat side is really about frequency spectrum and the threat of, you heard like satellite denial, or you heard some of the denial and access. So really the threat is when a portion of the frequency spectrum is either being exploited, denied in terms of access, or actually really preventing use of it. And so to me, that's a fairly common theme from a threat perspective in terms of generalizing across a number of the TICMs there. But clearly, oftentimes we think in a temporal sense. I really think we'll do better if we think in terms of a frequency domain sense, and then do the conversion from frequency domain to the time domain. And if you're an engineer, you'll understand the transformation that's required to do that. So that was probably one, I think, common theme there. I thought that was pretty important to understand. The other part is in terms of requirements and capability for the industry folks. Clearly, when you hear about PNT and denied access in the PNT, what does that mean for our capabilities? Satellite is probably just one part of the spectrum that's being denied. Those are all pretty important pieces that we're wrestling with. And then also I heard about interoperability. When we're talking about coalition and our partners out there, interoperability often takes they're kind of like third or fourth down on the list, but I was happy to hear a little bit about the importance of interoperability as a requirement. So what we'll do is open up the floor for questions. I have some easy ones to ask the panel if everybody's shy out there. So the floor is open. So who wants to go first?
All right, sir. I'm John Rudd. I'm back here. I'll be asking the questions as they come in on email.
Okay,
We've got several of them in here right now that are ready to go.
okay, so I don't get to scan and review them and protect the panel a little bit.
I'm doing that, sir.
Okay, all right.
That may
Okay,
be a
fire
good or
away.
bad thing, John.
Especially our Deputy CDID directors back there reading questions
So,
for us.
so the first question is, what are the Army's plans regarding anti-jam and protected waveforms?
That's a good, who's the EW guy out here? That's a good one.
That's me.
So I'll give you a little bit on, I won't necessarily say Army's perspective, but I'll say from a DoD perspective, there's a lot more, I should just say the awareness to focus on the AJ aspect. If you think about AJ as a requirement across communication devices as a whole is kind of increased tremendously. I think it took a backseat for a while, but at the DoD level, clearly at the ATNL level, when I sat in on a lot of the DABs and a number of the things that AJ threat and the AJ capability or whatever is something that's being looked at. At the Army level, I think that if it's, to me, it's not specific to EW. It's probably specific to the the communication piece in general. And if you look at the history of that, there's been a number of technical ways to kind of solve that. There's not really a clear one. I mean, we looked at going away from omnidirectional to directional and reduce the interference on the side lobe. Particular, we looked at nulling, we looked at frequency selective surface kinds of things. So there's a number of things that have been tried historically, but I wouldn't say that there's a silver bullet out there that people have collapsed on in terms of a capability to deal with the AJ requirement. Anybody else want to? I think how about you, Colonel Branch? You've got to deal with that.
So
the radio piece.
from my perspective, not just as we talk about waveforms, not just one that's you can't jam it, but we're also looking for research and development into better waveforms, more advanced waveforms, certainly better than the ones that we have. And in particular, I'm talking things like waveforms that are low probability of being intercepted or a low probability of being detected. And so right now I know that does not exist, but there are studies, a lot of what Mr. Wang said, there's studies going on to figure out if there are better waveforms out there. The ones that we have are just, with the physics of it, you have a waveform, you have a system that's transmitting the physics of it, they're going to be detected. So unless we come up with better waveforms, there's really no way to get around it.
The other thing I think to add to that is, LPI and AJ have been around a long time. What's really making it tougher is the affordability piece on the radio. You drive up the cost of a channel per channel on the radio tremendously when we put the LPI and AJ requirement in there. And so then it becomes a trade-off in terms of risk. And, there's certain limits in the cost per channel on communications radio. I come from the intercept radio side, and we spent a lot of time in trade-offs there. So even though there might be a technical kind of solution, it takes a hit a lot of times when it becomes looking at cost trade-off for the radio. And really, we're in a time when declining dollars where cost sometimes trumps performance, and then we describe the risk in terms of the performance trade-off that we gave up. So we could even say, hey, there's maybe good AJ and LPI solutions out there, but then it comes at an affordability trade-off in how we want to implement it on the comms radio side.
Sir, if I could also, the question is good because it also brings to light one of the seams that we have. So what do you do when there is a threat out there that crosses from the signal world to the electronic warfare world? How do we deal with that? And one of the things that we're doing in the near term, as we're identified as the proponent for electronic warfare, is to try to gather together the entire community of interest that deals with the spectrum in the very near term to get one focused way ahead of how do we become aware that there's an anti-jamming issue for the radios so that we can address it in the electronic warfare world, or there's an issue with a space program, or there's an issue with a cyber program that we need to address. So the entire community of interest needs to get together for that one way ahead.
So from an S&T or engineering perspective, again, I had mentioned the trade-off between capacity and protection, and that's exactly where we're at, where the emphasis had historically been on capacity, and we've done a lot of work in increasing the capacity. We are now seeing a swing back, and rightly so, given threat, to an interest in protection. And so we've got a lot of S&T work and all the stuff we talked about, whether that's directional or anti-jam antennas or networking, whether it's nanosats, whether it's raising the noise floor and hiding within the noise floor, dynamic spectrum allocate. There's a whole lot of things you can do, but you got to recognize it as a space. So we can give you a completely 100% protected radio. You can't communicate with anyone, right? But I can guarantee you it won't ever be located and it won't be jammed. Or we can give you what we've had historically, which is a lot of capacity with not much protection. And people shouldn't be surprised if what we want is capacity, there's not much protection. It's a trade space. So that work will continue, and the big discussion or the big decisions will be in where to trade off.
Yes, sir, thank you. That's where we have one system right now that we actually do have that anti-jam and capability is with the Smart T. But what we have to do now is take that Smart T and give it and upgrade it where it has greater capacity. So that's the efforts we're doing now is kind of bring that Smart T into the current century. Now, we've had the Smart T out there for quite a while. Unfortunately, what we have to bring back is the use and dependency on that, so to speak, on that Smart T. We have it at brigades, we have it at divisions and our ESBs. Unfortunately, it's becoming, because of training issues that we've got to fix, it's becoming a third option opposed to becoming, put in place in a greater option than that.
Yes, sir. So one of the things that, I talked earlier about the MNVR, and then I talked about the other radios where we're looking to implement cyber and EW survivability parameters. So that's one of the things that's already inherent with the mid-tier radio is an anti-jam capability. Probably not, it's not as advanced as we're talking Smart T, but there is in a capability already.
The final piece that I'll throw in is a significant investment, OSD, from the spectrum sell-off for us to reinvest about $40 million in the SRW narrowband. And so the goal there is an improved SRW waveform standard that addresses some of the protection issues as well as interoperability and range issues as well.
Okay, how about next question?
Yes, sir, thank you. How do the panel members reach out and identify innovations from business and academia to meet their mission needs?
So there are several ways we do that. Obviously, events like this allows us to interact with a large group of industry partners that share capabilities that align with our portfolios. We look at events recently held last month here at Fort Gordon, CyberQuest, and the conference did a great job of running down those capabilities as we look at issuing broad agency announcements to solicit no-fail opportunities for industry to allow us to examine their solutions against our problem sets. So I'll mention those two other opportunities.
So I look at that's one of our main focus areas at CERDEC. It needs to be. When I first moved over to I2WD, I was speaking to Kirk Volmek. He said to me, Gary, I love the technologies that CERDAC, I2, Night Vision, SNTCD are building for me, but I need more than that. I need you to understand the other services, other agencies. But more than that, I need you to understand industry. CERDAC had an industry day. I'm not sure that's something we've done consistently well over the past few years. So we had a CERDAC industry day where it was pretty much a one-way telling you what we thought. We need to really follow that up with technical interchange meetings. I encourage you to come see us. And after you hear what we say, throw the BS flag up there too. Say, hey, listen, I don't know that that's the right way. Challenge us. I'm trying to get our folks to challenge ourselves. We think we have the right ideas on a lot of things, but we don't always know what we don't know. So I look at us as a clearinghouse and helping shape that message for the PEOs and working with our trade partners. So please come see us.
So let me just, there's a lot out there, and I think we're just not using it. So just a couple of ones. The idea, I worked in the federal lab space. There's what's called the Stephenson Wilder Act, and we're obligated to make federal IP available to industry. And so the idea is industry comes in and license it. There's CRADAs where industry comes in and works with the federal lab space. I'm a big believer in prize competition model. So if you look at, there's challenge.gov. We don't make use of that, but you basically put a problem up there. I'm a big believer in petting zoos and what we call sandboxes, but there's a number of agencies that create a space where industry comes in and you get to test drive the stuff. NSA has a very good one that's been around for a long time. Cooperative agreements with universities and the academic side of the house is used a lot. There's 2563 and 2539, which are 10 USC codes that allows industry to work with government agencies. One's a sales agreement where you make use of, let's say, the antenna farm because the government has an antenna farm maybe, and then that way industry can come in and use that. I think the most recent thing is when Ash Carter put out DIUX out in Silicon Valley. It's kind of a derivative of InQtel out there. InQtel has been around for a long time. When I was in San Diego, I made trips up there many times. If you look at small business innovative research, a lot of the big industry guys will kind of use that as a farm system, but I encourage you all to, usually in June is when the component services have their big SBIRs out there. So there's a number of activities or instruments that can be used to get to industry. I still believe that there should be a better interaction between government and industry relative to the use of IRAD. They repealed the whole IRAD thing back in '92, and we've been kind of slogging around with how we work with IRAD. It really I've been trying for many, many years after they kind of peeled that thing back. Basically, IRAD got peeled back in '92 because industry thought government was providing too much oversight. And what's happened now is the IRAD piece is not the relationship with government is not as strong as it could be, but that could definitely use some improvement and work on. So I'd say there's a number of things out there. We're just not exercising and using them the way. And the problem is the knowledge of it. Often people develop expertise in use of just what I call one mechanism to get across the valley of death, where they work with industry and go from a 6-1-2-3 into the 6-6-6-7 side of the house. And you develop only one kind of expertise in one transition and not really develop a more broader let's say expertise. So one guy said to me, hey Gary, if I need a budget guy, I know where to get a budget guy. If I need a logistics person, I go to G4, I can get a logistics person. But there isn't a place where you can go and get a transition guy. So where you work with industry and government and you transition a capability, or you take something from industry into government and transition that. And that's been the hard piece. You can go to G7 and get a training guy. You can go get an engineer, but finding a transition guy and working with industry and transitioning, some, NDI technology, it's still pretty tough. And you can, for me, it's 30 years, going on 30 years, and DIUX is probably the third crack at it, at trying to do that. That's, XFDF and SecDef's, attempt to try to inject it. John Deutsch said, "We want you to infect us with how you do business." And that was when Louis got hired as the In-Q-Tel guy. He goes, "Why did you hire a toy maker?" And he said, "Hey, we want you to infect us with how you do business and how you do, how you make ideas into reality." And we're trying to do that. I mean, the Obama administration tries to bring in the guys into government, but it doesn't have the web stickiness. It doesn't stick. They come in and they do like 1 or 2 years and they're gone. And then we send guys out there for maybe a year and then come back. So, what's really the right way to do that? So I think there's a lot of ways to do it. We're just not using them, and we haven't educated people on how to use those instruments. Okay, next question.
All right, sir, thank you. Since you mentioned DIUX, the Department of Defense has established 2 Defense Innovation Unit experimental offices. How does CERDEC get information from and to these offices and activities?
Gary, you're the CERDEC guy, man.
There's another CERDEC guy.
So so DIUX out on the West Coast, and now the new DIUX in the Boston area. In addition, from an RDECom perspective, there's also ARL West now, which is an R&D presence down at USC. So certainly a recognition that, as I mentioned, if we're gonna innovate quick, and it's gonna be kind of a contact sport and a collaborative sport, it can't be just about what happens within our own lab. So I think from a positive viewpoint, there's recognition of that. Our intent is to put a presence out in those different elements and really try to leverage them so that we've got direct interaction with whoever's interacting with DIUX. So
I think it gets back to some of them, Gary kind of said that this is our 3rd attempt at some of that. So I've struggled a little bit on, I do plan to try to visit maybe DIUX and the ARL West Coast presence, because we talk about let's put somebody out there. But if I put a couple engineers out there and say, hey, listen, we want you to be L&Os to the West Coast, what does that mean? Will they be effective? Will they be enabled? I think what we need to do is we need to create those partnerships where we do research actually out there. So we don't just put a person in a desk in a cube that happens to be on a university, that we enable and do some research, and maybe with some non-traditional kind of industry as well. So I think sometimes we'll knee-jerk reaction, let's put somebody on the ground, and then in 3 years wonder why that person didn't deliver, is because we never enabled them, or we never gave them really a detailed plan of how to execute that. So I think we need to figure out how to make that effective.
I mean, I'll add to that. So you've heard the last couple of days about kind of cyber having no boundaries. And so it's interesting for us to start having to think about putting people physically somewhere as the only way to have a connection. I'd like to think there's some way to have a virtual connection without, it'd be impossible for us with our limited number of people to put someone out wherever innovation's happening. There'll be no one home at our place. And so I think we've got to think a little bit more creatively about virtual collaboration. I know ARL's got a big effort with Open Campus. How do we invite people in? And so I think yet to be seen what the best way is, but I think there's a recognition on the need to be collaborative and to reach out.
If I could just chime in, so obviously the question was directed at CERDEC, but we've had an opportunity, at least my TICM, to engage the DIUX out on the West Coast. And I'll say personalities matter. So I got a chance to meet with Lieutenant Colonel Carl Gossett, who's leading that effort, and Captain Brent Chapman, who came out of the ACI. And before they headed up there, we actually sat down with them and kind of laid out our portfolio, kind of directing them in the direction that we're looking at. And I get weekly updates from Carl's team out at the DIUX that we actually help feed back and do that. They were out here. Unfortunately, I was unavailable to UI, but they actually came out to Fort Gordon about 8 weeks ago, and sat down with my team and went over some of the opportunities. So again, I'll go back. Obviously, there's opportunities to virtually collaborate, but it comes down to people and just having good relationships with those organizations and individuals and understanding what they're looking at, and I think that helps as well.
Okay, I'm gonna add a question to Colonel Branch, because I think it's a good one here for industry to hear. What are your views and thoughts on NDI radios versus developmental radios, and what requirements should industry be focusing on in terms of radios?
Okay, so to the first question on my view of NDI, so I view non-developmental radios as a very positive way ahead in terms of getting capability out there to the force in a timely manner, much more quickly than you would get if you take a concept for a radio, you know, to operate in a SATCOM denied or an EW contested environment, to take that through the development process, which is significantly a lot more money, and you probably wouldn't see a radio like that until you're 5 or 10 years down the road. However, when you take an NDI radio, it's something that's essentially on the shelf. It may not 100% meet what our requirements are right now, but there is the potential to gradually improve that radio to where it meets our military requirements. And that's where, you know, we're looking for industry to help us out. So as we talk about what our requirements are, we know what we need in the future. We want to get to where that radio is, it probably won't be 100%, but where it is meeting our military requirements. So I do think that's a good approach to get capability out there to the force a lot faster. In terms of future requirements, again, you know, as you look at the threat, and I think it's pretty clear, you know, as we go back and look at the problem set in Europe, you know, we see what the enemy is going to present to us. And here we have an opportunity to do something about it. And so one of the benefits, I think, in terms of software-defined radios, going back to what Mr. Wang said, he talked about denial in a specific area of the spectrum. Well, if I have a radio, which is essentially a box, and I can program this to work in any part of the spectrum, so, okay, here it is, the enemy has denied us use of this part of the spectrum, so let's reprogram this software-defined radio, since it's software-definable, to now operate in a different portion of the spectrum. So I think, you know, developing and improving on our software-defined radios and making them survivable in a contested, congested environment, and at the same time, decreasing the size of the radios. What we don't want is now we have this improved capability, but it now comes in a bigger box. Because again, you know, we're really thinking about the soldiers and the war fighters that are really at the tactical edge, that are dismounted. And so certainly we don't want to increase the size, weight, and power requirements for those soldiers at that level. So any improvements that we can make to get to that, that's really where I think industry should help us get to in terms of tactical radios.
So I threw that question out because I went through this very similar thing on intercept radios. So on the comment side, we used to build a lot of intercept radios, and back then in the late 80s and early 90s, we would spend so much time writing a spec and getting it out there, and the threat was moving so fast. So we let it float. I convinced everybody to say, hey, we're not going to write a spec anymore, and we're going to express our requirements through forums like this, sometimes in much more smaller forums, but the idea was to let industry decide, hey, what was a better intercept radio? Another thing I tried to do is actually ride the comm side of the radio house and ride on their vehicles. The issue with that is an intercept radio has much more tougher requirements, and so it would drive the cost of the radio up too high, and so we couldn't buy off the comm side of the house. The other thing is I'm glad he mentioned SWAP too. Size, weight, and power is still a big screamy deal for the radios, and there hasn't been huge shifts in the power side of the radio, and so that's always a big driver. And then the other big driver is what I call spur-free dynamic range and A to D conversion. There's not a lot of huge advances research-wise in A to D converters, so that is the key for spur-free dynamic range. And that's been around for a long, long time, and so we are always looking at industry for help in those areas.
That was our final question for this afternoon's panel. Please welcome back Lieutenant General Wood back to the stage to thank them on behalf of ASEA, our audience, and to close our TechNet Augusta 2016.
Well, let's give the panel a great hand. Thank you very much. Mr. Wong, thank you so much for assembling this team of experts, and to all of you accomplishing our mission. We give you great credit and congratulate you on the work you do. And John Willison, I am going to make certain that you're not the last one next year. You did a wonderful job, by the way. You earned that spot fully. Not to be last, but to be best. We're going to go ahead and retire the colors in a moment.